Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Good Stories podcast. I'm Jody, here again with Stephen. Good morning, brother.
Good morning.
Today, we have a special opportunity to talk to someone new, or new to us, anyways, and a new voice on our show. I hope to learn more about his stories. We do talk, but it's evident from what I've seen that he has a deep love for stories and the drive to help people learn more about the width and length and depth and height of the love of God for his people. So thank you so much for joining us, Mr. L.B. Graham.
Thanks so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so very nice to meet you. You are entirely new to us as we are to you, but I have been listening to your podcast. I think Stephen has too.
Yeah, I have spent many hours with your voice, sir. I am caught up. It's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it very much.
Caught up is a lot of hours, so thanks for your patience and pursuit of hearing it.
No, it's been a pleasure.
So, LB, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure, and feel free to redirect if I'm going too long, but I'm currently a hospital chaplain. I haven't always been a hospital chaplain. I grew up in Baltimore, the son of a pastor, and went to Wheaton College. Was a literature major there. Wheaton was very influential in my life, very formative. The people there, friends and professors. It was just a great community. Went to seminary after college at a place called Covenant Theological Seminary in St. Louis, got my MDiv, and started teaching after that. So I had thought that getting an MDiv was a step on the way to getting a PhD in literature. Several of my favorite profs had SEM degrees, even though they were literature profs, but ultimately kind of moved in a different direction, started teaching, taught for 20 years in St. Louis. I thought of myself as an English teacher, but for the last 14, 15 years of my teaching career, I was also the chair of our Bible department. And for the last decade, I only taught the senior Bible class, which was called Worldviews, kind of a world religions philosophy class. And then when I left teaching, I meandered a bit, kind of trying to figure out what was next, but found my lane in chaplaincy. Have been doing that the last 8 years as a seminary chaplain. Sorry, not a seminary chaplain, but a hospital chaplain. And that required me to get ordained, which is often what people do after seminary, just usually not a quarter of a century after seminary. It's not the recommended path if you want to be ordained. I recommend studying and then taking your tests and not letting 25 years intervene. But once I had overcome the hurdles I needed to and was endorsed, I became professionally certified and what would be known as a certified chaplain. I work at a very large trauma one hospital in St. Louis. I mean, we have a bed count in the 1,200 something, and probably on any given day, our census is in the high 1,100s. And I work in our emergency department and our surgical intensive care unit and some of our oncology units. And so that's what I do kind of to make ends meet. But I have many interests in the world, and some of them are visible in other ways, like the podcast, which is primarily rooted in my concern for what I would call the shallowness of the American church. I think as a society, we're fairly shallow. As a church, we're fairly shallow. And the impetus for the podcast was to encourage depth. And that's what led me to work on the materials that became the first 30, 35 episodes of the podcast. I've worked through that material and have moved into a second phase where I'm interviewing folks on various topics related to depth in the church. And that's a short version of my story to date.
Oh, very good. I found you actually through your podcast. So I listen to a lot of Inklings related podcasts, and that's a lot of what we talk about on ours are those stories because they're wonderful. But the name further up, further in.
Yeah.
I assumed it was a Lewis podcast.
I'm so sorry. I misled you with my name.
No, it's part of what I love about podcasting in general. One, we've found that it's really collaborative and we meet other podcasters. It's been really fun, but you just never know from the title of a podcast. So we have a little dragon on ours, and I've gotten comments about our little dragon because we don't just talk about little dragons, right?
No,
Our logo.
Of course. You weren't wrong. I love the Inklings and I love Lewis, and hence the title. You know, in that scene in The Last Battle where they're entering the new Narnia and they keep saying, go further up, further in, I see that as symbolic, right, of this more deeper, further. Let's not just stand in the antechamber, right, in the vestibule. Let's go into the heart of things. I thought for people who have a love of Narnia, and many Christians do, that this would be a good use of the phrase.
I agree. I read somewhere that C.S. Lewis, specifically Mere Christianity, has done more to bring people to Christ as a book, as a story, than any other thing than the Bible itself, because it's so accessible, and what he displays about faith and our ability to access the love of God and how he does it. So yes, the illustration of further up, further in is one of those. It's just so beautiful. That whole book. I mean, it's a hard book until the end, and then you have that twist. Yeah, that one's amazing.
No, it is. It is a hard book. It's as a kid who read and reread Narnia, the early parts with the puzzle and all the things going on in the stall. And I mean, it was like, I don't know. And Susan doesn't get back in. There were lots of things I didn't like as a kid. It just, some of the magic it felt of the adventures were gone. But I do think as an older person, it has a lot of profound aspects to it.
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing I love about that is Mere Christianity is a gateway into Christianity for many people, but the whole platform of your podcast is the idea of depth. And this is one of the things that C.S. Lewis does incredibly well, is he's inviting and warm and welcoming, but the depth of the man and his writing is just unbelievable. And so the passage you chose certainly references more the depth than that intro. So I think that absolutely fits what, at least what I'm getting out of your podcast.
And honestly, C.S. Lewis was a huge influence on me. I don't know how evident that is beyond the title, but specifically the first section of Mere Christianity, the moral law argument that he presents there, had a big impact on me. And when you stop to think that that was originally a series of brief radio addresses during World War II, he was writing in a way that was for a spoken medium where people would be listening at the radio sets. And so he was a master of clarity and taking ideas that could be complicated and making them understandable. And few can achieve what he did, but to aspire to it is admirable nonetheless.
Yeah, agreed. I has struggled with Mere Christianity when I first tried to read it. And then it might have been Stephen who suggested reading it out loud. Totally changed it. And you're exactly right. So accessible. And I think it's because it was that audio presentation that it made such a difference. Because I really did kind of get bogged down with, I don't know if it was the phrasing or what, but reading it out loud helped entirely. And yeah, it's a life-changing book.
And I might be misremembering, but I think he did those first 5 chapters at the request of the BBC, and then it went over so well they asked him to do more. And so I don't know if the whole book came out audio first, but that's how he really got going on it, and it became quite a gift to the church.
Yeah, for sure. So you used an acronym that I don't know, an MDiv, in your education. What's an MDiv?
Yeah, so that's the professional degree that most pastors get when they go to seminary. It's called a Master of Divinity. Not every tradition has the same educational requirement for those who want to be ordained, but in most Presbyterianism, there's a pretty high standard for ordination. You can't just say, I think God's calling me, and the church say, great, we're ordaining you. You need to have some credentials, and the Master of Divinity is the typical degree. And most people who become chaplains have to have some kind of master's degree in either theology or something very close to it. And the MDiv is, again, probably the most common degree that chaplains hold.
So is the literature degree kind of paired with that, where they kind of go together because there's so much reading and concepts inside of the theology piece that the literature comes?
So the literature degree was just my undergraduate BA, right? It was just what I chose to take as an undergrad. The MDiv was my, that's the specific graduate degree that I got. So they were completely separate, but I think they go together. And for me, as someone who wanted to pursue originally literature at the PhD level, I really wanted to have my theological ducks in a row as a Christian. And so that's why I did seminary, and it ended up not being a sidestep before going on with my kind of life. It was the new direction. So
I don't know how it worked out that neither Stephen or I got a literature degree.
Yes,
it's kind
so
of
weird.
Shocking. What was your chemistry?
Chemistry. I have a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry as my undergrad major.
You probably
Yeah.
wanted to be employable.
Well, I wanted to be a doctor, or at least I
Well, there
thought
you
I wanted
go.
to be a doctor. And so chemistry was my stepping stone into medical school and then so on. So you and I definitely have some stuff in common. I have worked in hospitals
Mm,
extensively and worked closely with hospital chaplains. And just thank you for your work.
yeah,
I
you're
mean, there
welcome.
are different roles in this world.
Hmm.
Doctors, one of the early kind of phrases that came into my career path was neither priest nor judge, right? I
Hmm.
mean, as a doctor, it's not my role. I can't absolve people from sin. I can't condemn them. It's my job to be the doctor. But so
Mm,
often when I'm sitting in an exam room or in a hospital, all that goes through my mind is you need Jesus.
hmm.
I mean, there's only so much I can do. What
That's right.
you are sick in the soul, and so I am so grateful for the hospital chaplains I've worked with over time, and so thank you for your work in that because we need more.
Well, you're welcome. It's, I think, a meaningful calling, and I enjoy it's the wrong word because I see some hard things and am with people in difficult times, but I do enjoy the work that I do.
I think that'd be a really sensitive job. Is that I assume you have to go into it so prayerfully. Is that each conversation that pray ahead and like Lord give me the words, or does it become more of a process as since you're so familiar with it after what'd you say 8 years?
Yeah, I mean, it is 8 years. If you count the training, which I do, because you're working in a clinical setting as you're getting trained. I think a lot of people hear about what I do and they think it's very high stakes, and it is. But we're like any other hospital staff. We are with people as they journey through whatever's taken them there. Whether in my case, a lot of trauma cases or a lot of cancer patients, but some people just need someone to talk to, someone to debrief, someone to process with. Some people just, want someone to come and say a prayer for them. So you do, through repetition, obviously get a certain level of comfort, even with things that might make other people uncomfortable. Just like, I look at what the ED nurses do and think I could never be in the trauma bay when the patient comes in and they're doing all the things they need to do to triage what's happened. I want no part of that. The social worker and I are standing outside waiting for what might be next with family or even the patient themselves. So we all have our roles, and you become somewhat comfortable in your role. And I don't feel like I walk around necessarily super aware or anxious of the stakes of what I'm doing. I just do it because I've done this, many times. I've
Yeah.
knocked on many doors like this one, gone into many rooms with patients like this one, and we just find what we find and assess as we go, and help as we're able.
No, that's very good. Thank you. So I'm curious, as someone who got into literature earlier, especially if that was your undergrad, did you grow up around literature, people who enjoyed stories and books, or was that something that you got separate from your foundation?
No, 100%. Grew up in a literate family, and a mother who was a teacher and a father who was a pastor, both of whom were well educated, and a mother who read to me all the time.
Mhm.
Part of my childhood was we went to the library every Saturday. We picked up new books. There was a little box of comic books, and I was limited how many of those I could take, both by the library and my mother. She had to make
That's
sure
a
I
good
had,
mom.
yeah, had to make sure I had actual books, and I was a good and voracious reader, so the books were always done by the next Saturday as a general rule, and we would take them back and we would get more. And that's just part of how life went.
Man, a weekly trip to the library. We did a big trip. We had a big library like an hour away from home, but
Hmm.
it
Wow.
wasn't weekly. So you'd have to get a big stack when you went to make sure you had enough till the next time we went.
To clarify, we thought it was a big library.
Yeah.
We grew up in the middle of nowhere, and
Yeah,
so this
yeah,
was we're going to town now, and
yeah.
yeah, it didn't happen often.
Getting
And
booked.
my library was very close, so it was not a big deal to go to the library.
So the things you do, the chaplaincy and literary stuff, I mean, do you see an overlap with those two things, or are they kind of separate in your mind? Like I do literature, I do my reading over here, and then my
Um,
faith based chaplain over here, or is it crossover?
well, look, I think all of life is integrated in a way, but to me, they're largely separate domains. I mean, it's pretty common to, and even chaplaincy training, to talk about people in terms of story, like hear their story, learn their story, share your story with them. I just think there are real limits to what that actually can do for the process of what happens in the room. I meet someone and I never know their story. I get such a small snapshot of their life. It would be presumptuous for me to think I know their story. But understanding narrative, understanding kind of the key elements of story isn't bad. It can be helpful um, as a way of framing the kinds of thing you're seeing. They are in the midst of some hardship, some conflict. And so understanding story is partially understanding people. And that's what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with people. So there is definitely overlap, but the reading of stories, I love movies. So the watching of stories, and in my past, the writing of stories, I see that as a side of me. I don't probably consciously think often of that as super integrated with my daily life in
Yeah.
terms of chaplaincy. I think
Well,
of that more in the lens of ministry.
Hmm.
so I'm glad you brought that up, the writing of stories. So yes, I know that you've written stories. I don't know much about them, so I'm hoping you can share something about that with us.
Yeah, at this point, I have 5 novels in print, and the first 5 came out between 2004 and 2008. It was a fantasy series called The Binding of the Blade. They were big books, and it was a big project. I got my contract in 2001, 2002, and the first book was finished in 2002, and they decided to wait to put it out in 2004 just to make sure I didn't get behind because these were
Mm.
big books. And so I found myself for the next several years kind of writing a book while we were editing the book before and promoting the book that had just come out. There was a real pattern of this. And then I have 5 other novels in print that came out after that, 3 more in the fantasy genre that are connected to each other, and then 2 standalone books. Back then, the self-publishing wing of Amazon was called Create Space. So I did the 2 standalones and the third of the fantasy books that came out after The Binding of the Blade through that. My other 7 books come from traditional publishers. When I started writing, self-publishing was like the kiss of death. Like it was not reputable.
Mhm.
Like you were a wannabe if you self-published. All that changed. We've become much more a world where people can go traditional routes or do it themselves. We're doing podcasts, right, without some kind of official support.
Right?
Um,
Yeah.
and so, the pro and con of that is you have power when you publish your own book to do it the way you want to do it. You have control of the art. You have control of this, that, and the other thing. You also pay for it yourself, and you have to promote it yourself, and that can be very difficult. But um, I love fantasy stories. Probably the most influential story in my childhood on me was The Lord of the Rings. Count me among the millions who would say this. But, Tolkien created what felt like the most fleshed out, realized, complete, real feeling, three-dimensional story and universe I'd ever experienced. Fell in love with it. Um, and as much as I loved him and loved Lewis and loved others, there's a certain point at which I thought, they're not writing anymore, right? They're deceased, they're gone. I want to try my hand at this. And I ended up sharing some of the ideas with some students I had back in the late 90s. And they became kind of a consultant group that we had a online board back when online boards were like weird looking lists of kind of, I don't know how to describe it for someone who never did this kind of thing, because we were spread out and I shared ideas and they gave me feedback, and together we built a world and then built a story, and eventually had the good fortune to sell it to someone and write it, and that's how I got started.
Oh, okay. I have a lot of questions about writing. So just disparate questions, I guess. Like, was it fun? Did you enjoy writing? Because I've talked to writers and authors who some are very pleased with it and they love the process, and other think it's painful because if you get stuck or like it's not quite what they wanted it to be. Like, where did you land on that spectrum?
Yeah, no, I loved writing. It was a huge endeavor. I mean, it's a massive undertaking. Just conceiving of the story, which became 5 very large books, and then outlining books and developing them and executing. I think most people who set out to write a novel don't get very far before they give up, because it's work. If you read different books on writing, they're different kind of archetypes of how one sets out to write a novel, and there are those who, you know, think about Stephen King's on writing. He just has he has an idea, a vision, an opening scene. He has no idea where it's going, and he just writes. And I think that's part of why Stephen King endings are often so bad, because he didn't know where he was going. And you think this is a really anticlimactic finish. Well, he didn't know what he was doing. It's a compelling opening, but and this is, look, I've read and like some Stephen King. I think, you know, The Dark Tower, you know, is very good, and several of his other books too. But I was not I have an idea, but I don't know where it's going kind of person. I had a carefully worked out vision. Before I would sit down to write a chapter, I usually, back in those days, had a yellow pad with like, this character talks to this character about these things, and I would list them. And like, so I would sit down to write what had already been planned. And I never had writer's block. I never sat down and go, I don't know what's next, because I had a plan for what was next. That doesn't mean it didn't change, right? When
Sure.
I had a character early in the first book that was supposed to be just in the first few chapters of the book, I decided I liked him and found a way to bring him back into the story. So I would say to people who would ask this question, my story changed as it went on, but not more like how a river changes its course. It doesn't like pick up from going from here to here and move across country. It meanders to the left, it meanders to the right, it cuts a new channel. And so inspiration can happen anywhere, but when you have a pretty clear plan, when you know where you're going, I didn't find that it was hard to kind of figure out what was next. I just had to protect time, because time is key, and put in the work to write the words. And I would write 3 times a week, probably maybe 7 hours total, where I would start by going back to what I'd written the last time and going through it, changing, editing, amending, correcting mistakes. And then once I got to the end of what I'd written the time before, I had picked up the thread again, and then I would write the new pages. And if I wrote 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages, whatever it was, on a good day, 5 or 6 pages, well, then the next time I would start with those new pages and do the process again. And it's amazing how you can go a long distance if you go one step at a time and you just keep taking those steps.
Hmm. So you're saying you knew the ending when you began? Like you knew kind
A
of
hundred
the.
percent.
Really?
And I think the ending is the best part of the series. So if you ever try it, All My Holy Mountain, which is the 5th book, the last third of it is my favorite part of the whole thing. So don't give up because I wasn't good at the beginning and I was new at this. Hold on, there is a vision that's realized in the end.
Oh, see, I think ending a book well is the hardest part. I've read so many books and stories that I might like pieces of it or characters of it, but the ending is kind of a flop, like a where they weren't quite sure how to wrap it up. So books that have an excellent ending, I think, is a mark of like the really choice
Well,
authors, like the
just to be
really choice
clear,
books.
I knew how it was ending. You'll have to tell me if that means it's excellent. I mean, it was a plan. It wasn't a now what do I do moment. It was a we are here at the place I've been headed toward this whole time. Can I execute the vision? And other people have to tell me what they think, but I was headed there the whole time.
And I love those letters, like the Tolkien's letters or C.S. Lewis letter, when they're talking about their writing process, or here they are at Bree or something in the stories in the Lord of the Rings. Or I think he said once, Tolkien said that this new character popped up. I didn't expect him. Was that
Mm-hmm.
Strider?
Faramir.
Faramir.
He found him walking in the gardens of Ithilien, and he liked him. And so, yeah, so I mean, Tolkien notoriously was a planner and had
Yes,
everything planned out and mapped out. But even he discovered this
that's right.
great character walking as he journeyed. Your river analogy is wonderful.
Yeah, and doesn't Lewis say something similar about Aslan, right? He came bounding in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the imagination is the imagination, and you've got to leave room for inspiration anywhere you are. But I think people falsely make planning and inspiration or creativity like opposites.
Hmm.
So you can plan, and God can inspire, because I believe God is the author of these things, that God can grant you inspiration as you plan. He can grant you inspiration after the plan. It just, you need to recognize it wherever it comes.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the picture of the fawn, right, for Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe,
Yeah.
Yeah.
where he has this mental image of a fawn with did he have the tail over
Parcels,
his arm in the parcels?
the
Yes.
parcels, and the umbrella, and the lamp, and the waist, and
He had to come up with a story, like a framework around that. So I guess he was
hmm
discovering the river, that was a
yeah,
piece of it.
absolutely. And I think that's what King means when he talks on writing about kind of just grabbing this and going with it.
Mm,
But whether or not you start writing the novel after you've been seized by the image, or you take some time to think it through before you kind of write it, is an author's choice. And I just chose to plan before I wrote.
so I haven't read it. What is the name of your fictional world in the Binding of the Blade series?
Yeah, it's called Kirthanen.
Kirthanen. It's a good name.
There's a lot of Norse influence because I love Norse mythology, and so you'll see some names in there that harken back to that. And there's a fire giant who's pretty important, and his name is Volsutir. And there's a lot of Norse imagery, and sensitive to the fact that the Christian market can be pretty uncomfortable with magic. My main kind of wisdom character, right? Your Gandalfy type figure was a prophet, not a wizard. But Kirthanen is the name of the world you're in.
Yeah, I found that where, I mean, I'm a professing Christian, but I know people who don't read science fiction or fantasy because they are uncomfortable with the idea of magic or don't read Harry Potter, but I enjoy it. And I feel like there are not everything, you have to be discerning, but
Right.
you can certainly find wonderful lessons and hope even in stories that have magic and
Yeah,
wizards and these things.
I think there's a pretty clear distinction between like the fairy tale or the fantasy novel and dabbling in the occult. And I don't, at this point of life, feel the need to get in those arguments anymore. I just enjoy those stories. And if people don't want to read them, they don't.
Sure. Yeah. So you mentioned that Tolkien and Lewis are inspirational, so you took the action to write something of your own, and well done. People who do things try to make their own creation. That is admirable. But we've talked before, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. What is it about writings from Lewis and Tolkien, I guess specifically, that you think why do they still hit us so hard? Like huge fan of Lord of the Rings, huge fan of Narnia, and
Yeah.
they stick with us in a way that other series and books don't. I won't say there's no writers who haven't achieved that level, but man, they are something special. So, what do you think
Yeah.
the
I,
power of their stuff is?
Sure, and I don't know if I have I don't know if there's the answer. I have thoughts. I would argue that ultimately Lewis and Tolkien were fundamentally influenced by a lot of things, but Christianity among them. And if it's true that this is the story of our world, right? That the story of Christianity is the story of the God who made us and the one who redeemed us. The echoes of that story and their stories, I think, is part of that power. I mean, Tolkien, there's no religion really, no clear religion in most of Middle Earth. If it is, it's very far removed from the front of their lives. They don't pause to pray or worship or that kind of thing. And that we can talk about how it's there in the background. But there's a pretty clear theme of the small things and the weak things of this world overcoming the mighty. And I think that's a very Christian theme. The hobbits are the least of any of the major characters or races of Middle Earth, and yet it's by their faithfulness to the task at hand that the ring is destroyed and Middle Earth is saved. And the Return of the King is clearly metaphorical as well. And so you have these parallels to the story of God and Christ in this world that I think are part of that power. And I think in Lewis, it's much more transparent. By the way, I think Narnia is not nearly as good as The Lord of the Rings, and it was written much faster, and the depth isn't quite there that you find in Middle Earth. But as a child, I loved it. I still enjoy it very much. Lewis was a very talented man, but I think a lot of the power of his story is again the echoes of kind of true things that are just part of the warp and woof of this world.
You'd mentioned when we chatted ahead of this world building. And so clearly there is a lot of planning and
Hmm.
the consultant idea is a good one where you're bouncing ideas off other people ahead of time. But yeah, can you talk a little bit just about how someone builds a world?
Yeah, one piece at a time.
Yeah.
Um,
It's good advice.
I just these 3 former students who became kind of my consultants. One, I had taught them for several years at a small school, and I trusted their literary instincts because I'd helped shape them. So that's a little self-indulgent. But also they had turned me on to things I'd never heard of. Like, they got me into the Wheel of Time, which I think is phenomenal.
Oh, so good.
Maybe the best of, I think, the current kind of big series. Robert Jordan lost his way in the middle, but ultimately it came back and landed the plane in a great way. So I'm a huge fan of Wheel of Time. And so I knew these kids knew what they were talking about. They were late high school, early college at the time. And I was really just bouncing ideas off them, and I took them as a good sampling of my representative audience. And that's just an answer to kind of why I think creativity broadly grows geometrically when more voices are involved.
Hmm.
I think there's no getting around. This was my idea and my story. I'd had the idea at the heart of this starting in the summer of 1992. So it was an idea I'd had for a while. And fundamentally, I'll just say that the birth of this idea for me was the idea of a world where the fall is represented by the making of weapons, and the kind of deliverance of this world at the end of time comes with the unmaking of weapons. And it's based on that image in Isaiah of taking spears and swords and beating them into plowshares and pruning hooks. Like, we don't need implements of war anymore because we've reached the end and it's a time of peace. That was kind of the first image that I had. And so I imagined a character who would fight through amazing obstacles to reach that end, only to realize that the sword that had become his tool was no longer needed, and he has something of an identity crisis because it's time to give up the sword, which to that point has defined him.
Hmm.
So that became kind of a character arc that went along with these images. And I was traveling. I was on a summer program in Great Britain, and I was traveling about after the program ended in Scotland. And I'm reading my little collection of W.B. Yeats poems, and there's a footnote in the back talking about archetypes, and the archetypes, like how geographic parts of the map are tied to different themes. So, like, the South is connected to romance and summer and all these things, and the West is connected to fall, stories of tragedy and things falling, and the North and winter and cold, things dark and depressing, and the East to spring and the sun rising and things newborn. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if you had a story that moved geographically through these places, but then thematically through these parts of life, and then ended in the middle? And so I turned that into kind of a progression, so that the first book largely happens in the South, moves to kind of the West, and then the North, and then the East, and finally into the center, although not exclusively so. But anyway, these various parts came together to build the story and the arc. And you'd asked me about world building, and I've not answered your question yet.
It's a big
But
question.
but having conceived of, broadly speaking, a trajectory and a plan, and I had to fill it out. And you need to have a world that makes sense and kind of is coherent. So my world is largely agrarian. Um, and so I want to have people refer to time. But I don't want them to use months like January or February or March. Like, that's our world. And this isn't like Middle Earth, which is kind of connected in some way to our world. The world, the time, the fourth age with the big people and the little people have disappeared. It needed to be different. And so, I decided to be seasonal, right? And they reckon time by the four seasons. And so, rather than talking about months in our language of months, they talk about spring rising or full spring or spring waning. And they talk about it in terms of, we're headed in spring, it's the middle of spring, it's the end of spring. And because the central geographic feature of the world is the Holy Mountain, Agia Moldonai, which is in the center, their religious observations had to do with these mound rites that would happen in the middle of every season, where as a community they would gather and kind of pay homage to All Father, who is the god of Kirthanen. And so I tried to how they reckoned time, kind of how they did their religious rituals. It was meant to be connected to these things. And so when you're going to give an oath in Kirthanen, you would say something like "by the mountain," right, which is kind of your swear,
Hmm.
because ultimately that is the central object in the world. So those are just small examples of how I can't tell you how long I agonized over how to reckon time and how to refer to it until this idea came to me. And then I'm like, oh, that's how I'm going to do it. This is now
Hmm.
full winter, or it's, winter rising. And so I had my language to talk about where we were on the calendar in a way that felt consistent with the world.
Oh, that's very good. As Stephen knows, I always enjoy different books, exclamations, or even expletives, like just the
Yes,
sounds or the phrases that they use. Or it happens in cartoons too. My kids
Mhm.
used to watch Octonauts, and each character has this phrase that they say on repeat. But man, there's some funny ones out there. Like
indeed.
I have a book called, I think it's called Zounds, where they do this collection of just
Sounds like a Scooby
exclamation.
Dooism.
Yes, that's zoinks.
Zoinks.
Zoinks. The time is interesting. I would think those kind of constructs would be really important to how the whole story can come together or not. Because if you don't have a foundation of a consistent foundation of whether it's language and Tolkien or time, how you mention basically the normal day to day things in this world, how could you have
Yeah.
abnormal things for that world, things happening in adventures? So that makes a lot of good sense. That's really interesting. And Robert Jordan, Wheel of Time, absolutely yes.
Huge
Yes,
fan.
absolutely.
Huge fan.
Yeah, I read it every so often just because it's fun to go back through. My favorite character and one of the best characters in all of fantasy literature is Matrim. Matrim Cawthon is my guy. I just kind of put up with him in the first two books till he really becomes himself, and then we're on.
Oh
So
yeah.
Yeah, when he comes into his own, there is something about him
yeah,
that is special, and it takes a while. I mean, it's that slow build.
oh,
It's
he
not something
is
you
he
can
is
do.
the best, the gambler, the Prince of Battles, or whatever they call him at the end. Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, there's a scene later on in the books. I forget which book because there's so many of them, but where him and the other boy Rand are comparing like the cool stuff that they've done. But one is the dragon, but the other one is Matrim Cawthon, and that he can compete and the have any conversation at all about who's
Oh
done
yeah,
more. It's amazing.
And that
and
he kind of wins that argument
Yeah.
is
and,
impressive.
in terms of characters, there's no question Matrim is the most interesting because Rand's arc basically kind of stalls out at a certain point because he's the dragon and there's not a lot of change after a certain point. Just
Yeah. He's
he
waiting for
becomes
the end.
harder, then he becomes softer, and Perrin just kind of cycles endlessly through this little love triangle that gets so tedious after a while. And
Mm.
Matrim is just so much more dynamic in terms of his change and development and story. There's just more there.
Yeah, I think Perrin is actually my favorite, but not in the middle. As you say, I kind of
Yeah.
slump in the middle. Some of the
Yeah, he
quotes
has some
in
great
full
moments
screen.
near the end for sure.
Yeah, but then you're right. Matt though had the most moments that surprised me. So for our listeners, The Wheel of Time, we did book one,
Hmm.
and even the first
Yeah.
book we had to do in two parts because they
Oh
are
yeah.
so
The Eye of
long.
the World is massive. Yeah.
But I don't know who's the brown Asia lady. Viren. Viren is a
Varen Sedai
wonderful
is one of my favorite
character.
characters.
Yeah, no,
And
she's great.
so
Yeah.
this is a common question between us and actually in our family because our older brother introduced Wheel of Time to me.
Hmm.
And it's the question of who's your favorite character. And my answer changes as time goes by. Matt is definitely up there. But mine, I think, consistently comes back to Lan. I love
Yeah.
Lan. He
Hmm.
doesn't have the same degree of character arc because he steps into the story as a full grown adult.
That's right.
He steps into the story of somebody who's already developed. But his consistency and his courage and his bravery and his loyalty just hits so hard for me. And then the other thing I love about him is that in this world of magical powers, in this world where everybody can do something, earth shaking and mind bending and reality bending, he has the discipline of the sword. He's a man in this world, and yet it's so important. And I love him as a character.
Yeah, absolutely. And his, of course, ride across the north toward Tarmangaiden is
So good.
legendary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that is one that it achieves the wonderful ending, the powerful ending. Amazing. Yes, we are fans for sure.
Sanderson was a great choice to finish it, and he landed the plane well.
I will always be grateful to that man because I
Absolutely.
cannot imagine. I would not be okay if that story didn't end.
Yeah.
If it ended with the death of Robert Jordan, I would not get over that. And
No, that's right.
so grateful to him for taking up the reins and finishing it and really honoring Robert Jordan's vision and plan and work for
Yeah,
it.
no, agreed.
Okay, sorry, that was our Wheel of Time aside.
Yeah.
You brought it up, so I had to say something.
Blame me.
So when we were talking about doing this, I asked if there was a story that specifically means a lot to you, not of your own writing, separate from that. And you actually came back with 3 big ones, but just pick one that we can talk about for now, and I'm happy to move on to more. But stories or authors that are very meaningful to you.
I'm going to put this back in your court. I am your guest. I will talk about whichever of the 3 you want to talk about, and if we have time for others, we'll go there.
The 3 you told me were Charles Williams in general, but specifically War in Heaven. Is that right?
No, I was going to talk about Descent into Hell. I think you guys
Descent
have
into
already
Hell.
talked about War in Heaven.
And then the Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, and Tennyson, or
Idylls of the King.
Pick your favorite, brother.
Oh boy, favorite of those. Well, so Martian
Or the
Chronicles,
one you want to talk about, even if it's not your favorite.
Martian Chronicles are new to me, so I don't have. I'm excited to learn about them, but I would love to hear your take on Descent into Hell because that is one of Charles Williamson's great works, as far as I'm concerned. And
completely agree.
Yeah, I would love to get your take on that one.
So why don't we talk about Charles Williams and then talk about Descent into Hell specifically? So interestingly, my introduction to Charles Williams and the Idylls of the King came in the same class. I was a Wheaton student, as I said, and there was a literature teacher named Father McClatchy who was actually dying of cancer. And the last class he taught was an Arthurian romance class. And I don't remember if I was a sophomore or junior, but I took the class. It was a small seminar, just a handful of students. There were days we didn't have class because he couldn't. But part of his reading list was War in Heaven, right? The most bizarre grail chase in probably literary history. An archdeacon and a policeman, and touring the English countryside. I mean, it's not at all what you think of when you think of Arthurian romance, but he wanted us to see part of the Grail kind of story there. And Idylls of the King. So I met Charles Williams for the first time, and I met Idylls of the King for the first time in that class, and I've loved them both ever since. The second Charles Williams book I read was Descent into Hell, and that was a recommendation, and it was because of a particular theme in it. And that person actually told me about the book that to me is the key. The Novels of Charles Williams is a book by Thomas Howard. To me, it is the essential companion to reading Charles Williams. I do not read Charles Williams by himself. And if you've ever read him, you understand what I'm talking about. You're like, what's going on? I don't know what's happening. What is the deal? And so for me, the Novels of Charles Williams is like everything kind of Cliff Notes should be. You've got someone who is learned in Charles Williams specifically and has paid close attention to this text in particular, giving you their thoughts on it. And so I would read the book and read, the chapter on the book I'm reading kind of side by side. And that's how I enjoy them. And so let me say a few words about how Tom Howard introduces Charles Williams and his key themes, and then how it applies to that novel, because I'm very much indebted to him, and I just want to give credit where it's due. But Charles Williams, one of his central themes is what we could call substitution and exchange. And as a young man, he was disqualified from service in World War I for medical reasons. And as Tom Howard points out, this was very influential on him because he was keenly aware that the sacrifice of these young men in Europe was making life as he knew and enjoyed it possible, right? They were laying themselves down that he and others might live and have the life that they had. And this idea of substitution and exchange, that one person lays themselves down for another, became very important to his vision of, the world and how it's meant to work. Even the bread on your table is possible because the wheat dies that it might be made, or the meat on your table is possible because the animal dies that you can eat and be nourished. And of course, in a Christian context, God sends his son to die and absorb God's wrath, so that we might have life, and that this substitution is key to the exchange that gives us life. And so, in a related way, all of us all the time are moving toward either joy or wrath, by the decisions we make, the choices we make, whether or not we choose when need and your neighbor put in front of you an opportunity for selflessness and charity to make a sacrifice for the good of another. You are given a chance at joy. You're given a chance at becoming who we were meant to be. And at the same time, when we choose self and comfort and illusion over that sacrifice and charity and love, we are choosing hell. And that is a key aspect to his writing. And all of it is front and center in Descent into Hell, which is, like all of Williams' novels, it's about something that on the surface you're thinking, this is just really weird, and I don't know how this becomes a novel.
Very bizarre.
Like Stephen, tell me, have you read many beyond War in Heaven, or just War in
Yes.
Heaven?
No, I have read all of Charles Williams.
Right. So
So it is a
we've
novel.
got
Fiction.
you've got, original bits of matter, right, that can give you
Mhm.
time and space travel. You've
Mhm.
got the original tarot card deck. You've got platonic forms loose in the countryside. You have all these bizarre scenarios that a lot of modern Christians might go, this is like occultic, but it's not. It's like the magic stories we talked about. It's just an occasion to have characters confronted with choices that either confirm a choice to kind of lay yourself down for another and do what is, good and charitable and kind, or to choose self and power and whatever false idol is in front of you to choose. And the same thing in Descent into Hell. So a little bit about the story, and we'll leave a lot of things off because it's too detailed and complicated to tell the whole story. But the whole book really revolves around the performance by this local amateur theater group in this place called Battle Hill of a play by a famous poet named Peter Stanhope. So this famous playwright has written a play, and they're kind of disappointed that it's a pastoral, not some kind of tragedy or something like that. But they're excited to be able to do this play that this famous guy has written. And the interesting thing is, Stanhope is maybe in many ways your hero, to the extent that there is any hero in a Williams novel. He is a selfless man, self-deprecating, eager to put himself at the service of others. Like, he is the exact opposite of the egotistical artist, right? Think about how we often see in movies and stories, like the playwright or the author portrayed, like yelling at people because that's not the way I wrote it. That's not my vision, and kind of demanding it be done a certain way. Like, he is the antithesis of this. Whereas the people putting on the play are largely selfish and self-important. The director and some of the actresses, they've got their own ideas and they're pompous and they don't know what they're talking about, but they like to talk anyway. And Stanhope is just very different. And he's going to be really important to kind of the deliverance of another character, as we'll see in a moment. You've got a woman named Pauline Anstruther, who is a very meek woman. She is one of those who is in the play. She's not one of the ones who kind of puts herself front and center. She doesn't like to hear her own voice. She doesn't talk in pompous ways. But she is interestingly tormented by a bizarre fear. She has a fear of running into her doppelganger. And again, this is the moment where someone listening to this is going like, what in the world are we talking about? But this woman is convinced that frequently, often at night, when she's alone in the distance, she catches a glimpse of herself, of this doppelganger. And her great fear is that she will run into this doppelganger up close and personal. And you can make of that what you will. I think Tom Howard talks about, maybe this is a pretty thinly veiled way of talking about being afraid of facing herself or being confronted with herself. But whatever it is, it's presented to us like fact. There's a doppelganger. She doesn't want to run into it, and she's terrified. The third really important central character is a man named Lawrence Wentworth, who's a historian who also lives on Battle Hill. And there are a few things we learn about him, but we'll focus on two. One is night after night, he dreams of descending a great rope down, down, down into the darkness, which again is a not so thinly veiled image of his descent into hell, which is the descent that the title of the book is talking about. And one illustration of his actual descent into hell is that he is in the midst of a scholarly rivalry with another historian over very small, seemingly insignificant details of the War of the Roses. And the point that is made clear is that this other historian is engaged in this rivalry because they love truth and facts, and they're trying to set the record straight. Wentworth is engaged in this feud, this rivalry, because he loves himself. It's all about personal honor, about winning this public dispute, about being seen to be right and better, and all these things. It's not about the truth, and it's not about setting the record straight. And so Wentworth consistently makes choices that are very clearly presented as deliberate, conscious choices to love and honor self and not others. And this is most clearly highlighted, I think, when this other historian that he's engaged in this rivalry with is given an honor, and he has this chance, right, to be happy for him, to congratulate him, to in some way honor him, and he simply refuses. He will not do this. And it's a picture of these small ways that we embrace damnation over salvation because he will not celebrate or be happy for his rival. And I won't talk more about Wentworth. There's another very important storyline for him in his gradual damnation where he chooses illusion over reality. There's a kind of a storyline throughout the novel about if you will, a ghost, a figure who has committed suicide on Battle Hill in a past generation whose spirit is restless and wandering. Those things fit in, but I won't get into them. I'll simply say that at the heart of the substitution and exchange idea, which I've said is key in all of Williams, in this book, it comes down to a moment where Pauline shares with Stanhope her fear. Like she takes the step of confiding in Stanhope her fear of her doppelganger. And Stanhope, quite surprisingly, offers to carry it for her so that she doesn't have to.
To carry her fear?
Carry the fear. Huh. And Pauline, like all of us, like you, just now, that reaction, that is exactly right. Like Pauline finds this absurd. You cannot carry my fear from me. You can't take my fear from me. And so there's this exchange with Stanhope, which, she's basically reacting the way any of us react. And Stanhope simply connects what he's offering to Paul's words about carrying one another's burdens. And he's saying, if I'm carrying it, you don't have to carry it anymore. Like you will be free of it. Just let me carry it for you. And she kind of fights back in different ways. Kind of, what about my self-respect and, all this kind of stuff. And he's like, unless you want to make yourself kind of a universe unto yourself, is kind of his language. This is how the world actually is meant to work. You don't have to carry it alone. And so for Pauline, in some ways, her first step toward salvation and freedom and release is to let herself be helped, to consent that she's not enough, that the help offered freely and kindly of another is something she needs to accept. And so she does. She, probably skeptical it would do anything, tells Stanhope that she would let him carry her fear. And much to her surprise, Pauline finds herself surprisingly far less afraid. And it's the beginning of her own journey toward joy and freedom and release from these things. And there are other characters like Pauline's grandmother, who is a model of someone who is selfless and, again, is an illustration of the right kinds of thinking. But to me, at the heart of any Williams experience, in the midst of strange goings on and language you don't fully understand, and images and kind of storylines that feel overly complicated, there are very simple ideas that I think are very powerful and near and dear to the heart of the gospel.
Well, my experience is only with War in Heaven. Descent into Hell is in my to-be-read pile, actually. But the Charles Williams in general that I just find amazing is how many characters he can put into typically not a very long story, but he does it so well. You learn so much about them. In War in Heaven, he'll spend, a paragraph on a person, their experience, and you know them. You know so much about them from that snippet. And then he moves on to somebody else. But I think that's what he does. He conveys so much in not very much space. And the writing of people's experiences are impactful. So I was thinking of the lady in War in Heaven, the mother, but she's not in very much of the story. But her experiences are very clear and you feel them along the way. The archdeacon has a lot bigger role and you do learn more about him, but Charles Williams' ability to write personality and experiences and pain and joy and all these things is amazing.
And he's so layered. So thank you for that beautiful summary of a book I love. That I mean, you nailed that. That is so
I'm
many
stealing
of
from
the
Tom
wonderful.
Howard, so we'll pass on the praise. But yes, I
Yeah.
love it too.
Well, thank you to Tom Howard too.
Yeah.
All those points are just wonderful about it, and there's so much more. I mean,
Yes.
so much of what I get out of Charles Williams is the divine, right? God entering into the mundane. Because
Yeah.
it's usually a mundane thing. It's a play with a not very good local theater. But then
Yes.
all of a sudden, these cosmic themes start playing out. And it's this interconnectedness between the highest and the lowest. And it ennobles the mundane and it makes the divine accessible. And
Yeah.
it's just amazing how it does it. But the other thing about War in Heaven about Descent into Hell specifically, is I think it may be the finest example of what story can do that philosophy can't.
Mm.
He has so many philosophies that he had worked out. But if you want to understand what he means by substitution, you read the couple pages in that chapter. And that story expresses it in a way that I don't think it can be expressed in another way. Or the entire concept of that active descent into hell, the physical climbing down of a rope. Again, he's not sliding down this rope.
No,
He's
not by not
climbing
down.
down it. I mean, so there are things like that that just jump out at you in this wonderful telling of a story where all of a sudden you understand truths that you couldn't understand in the same way if somebody just explained it to you. There's a scene or a passage in Descent into Hell where it describes Stanhope, the artist, that somebody asked him what one of his particular plays means. And so it says that Stanhope's answer was to basically just read him the play. And I think that's what we get in this book.
Yeah.
And it's such an incredible example, I think, of the role of art and the power of art and story specifically to express truths. And so it's a great, great book.
Several things come to mind, and I'll try to be brief on each of them. But the first thought that comes to mind in your point that you just made, and you might not agree with the way I frame it, but I think when Tom Howard explains the idea of substitution and exchange in the intro before he gets to the chapters dealing with individual novels, you can understand it. But when you read Descent into Hell, you feel it. Like you were moved by it. Like this is not just a conception or an idea. This is an illustration of what it means to lay yourself down for your neighbor. And it's powerful in a way that the explanation of it just isn't. The explanation is helpful, but the story is transcendent in the way it moves us. And in terms of the complexity of books like Descent into Hell, I didn't even mention what might be the oddest part, where Wentworth is infatuated with one of the young actresses in the play named Adele, and she likes him because he explains stuff to her, and he's flattered that his interest in his ideas is interest in him, but she's not interested in him. She's interested in another young man who's in the play. And when he discovers that, he has this choice to either kind of actually pursue her and try to, show affection for her or try to make a relationship with her, or he's given this choice to embrace a succubus, essentially, an imaginary Adele who's, not the real Adele. And, he embraces the lie and the illusion and the succubus. And this is part of his damnation. He doesn't pursue a real relationship with a real person. He embraces a fantasy that's clearly not for his benefit. The last thing I'd say for the person who might be listening to this and doesn't know Charles Williams at all, like if you actually want to get into him, I would recommend all of his books. They're not equally powerful or good, I don't think. But the novels of Charles Williams will start you with Shadows of Ecstasy, which I think is the worst of them. But even that is interesting. And then as you move through it, I think it's more chronological the way he's laid it out than kind of by how good they are. But the last two are All Hallows Eve and Descent into Hell, which are both masterpieces, I think, in their own way. And once you do the work to kind of appreciate and enjoy his language, it's worth just doing them all because it pays dividends. It's like reading Shakespeare. Like it's hard for us to make sense of what's happening, but the more time you spend in it, the more you feel like, okay, I follow what's happening here.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I would, for new readers to Charles Williams, particularly Christians, I would recommend pushing Shadows of Ecstasy to the last.
Yeah.
It's a deeply uncomfortable book in many ways. I think there's some beauty in it, but it's not my favorite of his novels. So I would push that to the last. Yeah,
Yeah, you have to
you
make
can suffer from
allowances, I think, for the 30s and the
that.
limitations. There's a, I think you're talking about the way Africa might be portrayed.
Yes, I'm also talking about Charles Williams himself. I mean, so Charles Williams was an interesting man. I mean, C.S. Lewis loved him. Many people loved him. On his death, a number of writers gathered together to write basically a book where they contributed, and the idea was the money would go to his widow. So this is actually where we get Tolkien's On Fairy Stories. It was originally published in these essays on Charles Williams. So he had an incredible impact on the writers and the people around him. But he, in his personal life, again, for Christians, is pretty disturbing. He was deeply into the occult. He was a magician in his own right. And it's interesting balancing some of the stuff he did with some of the stuff he writes. And it's part of what makes him such a fascinating figure. Within Shadows of Ecstasy in particular, you have this character who is basically a magician and an adept. He's an evil man. I mean, when you read through the story, he's terrible, but you get this almost wistful longing after him by characters that aren't necessarily evil. And so, again, I think there are some uncomfortable themes in Shadows of Ecstasy. It's my understanding is he actually wrote that early in his
one of his
kind of
first
literary
novels.
journey. Yeah, but it was published, I think, last.
Yeah.
And so that
several number
helped me.
posthumous. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think his theology evolved. I think his relationship with the occult evolved. But I would recommend pushing that one down the list.
I think, like all of us, that's true, that it changed over time. Howard talks about, that issue of the occult, and he would say that the notion that he was really into the occult is overstated, that there was a short period of life where he was fascinated with it, and it becomes something that he uses in his writing, to be sure. But I don't think it remained an ongoing interest for him or any kind of thing that it was a big part of his practice. But we can agree to disagree. Maybe different sources maybe see it differently. But
definitely debates among scholars on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you nailed it, though, with having something that can help you read through Charles Williams, like
very helpful.
Howard's book, is what makes them accessible and more understandable. Because I did jump in on my own and I was bewildered. What is going on? And I hear 100%. That's an easy one. War in Heaven's an easier one. But Stephen has helped me so much with it just because he has read so much and supplementary things. And I've been listening to podcasts. They've been talking about Charles Williams. And I was surprised to learn. I heard a man say that at the time they were alive, Williams was more popular than Lewis. Lewis would write, I think, a review of a book of Williams, and he was the one kind of tagging along in terms of Charles Williams' writing, which that's surprising to me because now I feel like Lewis is so much more well-known.
Oh, yeah.
And I know of Williams because of Lewis.
Part of this, right, is their stories, right? Because Williams was unsuccessful because he was poor at becoming the scholar that Lewis became. Like he ended up having to become an editor. And so he'd never achieved kind of his academic dreams. But the flip side of that is that a lot of people who are in a position like Lewis, like it was frowned upon to be popular. Like Lewis got a lot of grief from his peers as he increasingly did things that put him in the public eye and made him popular. Like this was kind of the choice in the life of the common man.
Hmm.
And I think at a certain point, Lewis didn't care. He saw he had a chance to be something for the church, for many people that was a blessing, and he just embraced it. But this is part of why he spent the twilight of his career at Cambridge, not Oxford, because it became clear he was never going to kind of advance at Oxford the way he ought to have, because there was disdain for his popularity. But yeah, Williams was in a very different kind of position in general.
Yeah, there's a pretty famous letter from C.S. Lewis where somebody is asking him about kind of influences. And he sets the record straight on a number of these things. I mean, he points out that, Dorothy Sayers was already well established long before they ever met, that she was more notable than he was at the time.
Mhm.
He points out that Williams influenced him. He didn't influence Williams. Williams was already established when Lewis started to write, and Williams was an influence on Lewis. And then, of course, the famous quote that nobody influences Tolkien.
Yeah.
He does his own thing.
Yeah.
Which, again, there's debate on, but yeah.
Yeah, people do influence him, in the distant past, but Tolkien was his own guy, and Sayers, right? Sayers, especially her Divine Comedy, was a real scholarly accomplishment that kind of quite apart from anything connected to the Inklings had made a name for her.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's absolutely a link to Williams, because it was Williams' passion for the Divine Comedy that got Dorothy Sayers so interested in it. Dorothy Sayers and Williams had their own friendship, largely around plays. So they both wrote plays and knew each other in that society. And then when Williams got the opportunity to lecture and teach, as he did some, much of what he did was on the Divine Comedy. And so Dorothy Sayers, as I understand, was so intrigued by that she got into it in a big way and ended up doing her translation on it, which isn't finished. I don't think she finished the Paradiso, but I've been reading through some letters of Lewis recently where he was talking about how good it is and how much he enjoyed it, where he went through the Inferno and then got to the Purgatorio and wondered, well, there's no way she can do the switch like Dante did, where the language elevates, where it goes from this hellish language and then the very poetry changes to a redeemed language. And then he says it blew him away. She did. So he was a big fan of it.
Well, I own them all, but True Confessions, haven't read them all, so maybe at some point I will actually finish. But
No, I never made it through Paradise.
no,
No.
there's a reason why we're all fascinated with hell. It seems more, interesting the way people are punished. But
It is worth doing. It's another one that is worth doing with a guide.
Yeah.
So going
Inferno
alone
is great.
really
Yeah.
hard.
Mm-hmm.
So and it makes sense too I'm totally tangenting here, but in the Divine Comedy, it makes sense that the language gets harder as you progress towards God, because complexity increases. So the closer you get to the divine, though at this time there's the argument about the divine simplicity of God, but that doesn't mean not more potent, more powerful, more complicated, more deep, more rich. And so the very poetry had to evolve through that, which means that for us reading it, it's a much harder read, because it's a much more dense, much more theologically significant poetry, which is part of the masterpiece of Dante. And so really, in the same way that Dante the Pilgrim needed a guide through them, it is helpful to have somebody who has read it, understands it, to help guide you through it. And the more you do that, I find the more I'm attracted to the Purgatorio and the Paradiso, even above the Inferno. But at different stages of your life, each one will speak to you in a different way. And so it's a masterful work. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, and again, the benefits in Sayers is not just the translation, but her notes, which can help.
Yeah, most of the things I read in tandem with other things that people who've really studied it have written. Because, I mean, if you spend a lifetime studying on something and write something about it, clearly you know more than me just picking up a work. So in general, I tend to read a book and then have the supplemental commentary of some kind next to it. That's kind of my process.
And this is a little bit of a segue into something we're not actually talking about. There are things in my life that I read and reread. They're just standards that I come back to. And two of the things we've already mentioned are on that list, right? The Wheel of Time is a reread, but so also are the novels of Charles Williams. They're just something I periodically pick up, start at the beginning and go through. Other things on that list would include something you've talked about, like Ender's Game, which is like an old friend. I love Ender's Game. Lord of the Rings, other things that are just, it's time to do this again. Let's do it again.
Oh, every time we reread, we talk about rereading a lot because even simple works, fairy tales thing, I get more out of them every single time you reread a book. So, big fan of the reread. That is a question I sometimes ask. Like, what is the book you've reread the most number of times? Do you have one that you've done the most number of?
Yeah, I don't know that I just haven't kept track. Given how many times I read Narnia as a kid, it might be Narnia, but I wouldn't be surprised if as an adult it is an Ender's Game, just because it's a quick read, and I've read all the first four, and I've read all of the Bean novels, and I've read lots of things in the Ender universe, but it's really just Ender's Game by itself is something I frequently read just to read it again.
I didn't know there were Bean novels. Are they good?
Yeah, that's a complicated question.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Well, no, I have mixed feelings. Like the first Bean novel is basically Ender's Game from Bean's perspective, and I think the Bean trajectory is fine, but if you read the Bean novel, it just changes how it makes kind of Bean the real kind of architect of everything behind Ender, and I don't really like that. Afterwards, when Bean is back on Earth, the next three are all really geopolitics, and it involves Peter and other things, and kind of what's happening on Earth immediately after kind of the defeat of the buggers. And so I think they're fine books, but Ender's Game, and part of what makes Ender's Game so special, really starts and ends with Ender's Game.
Yeah.
And just read as a standalone, for what it is, child turned hero or Xenocide, depending on how you want to read the end of it. It's just a great story. The battle school, the fantasy game, like all the elements that make the first one so great, left to their own devices, are fine just the way they are.
Yeah, I think it's a masterpiece. And I agree with you. I've read all the others, but I've never reread the others. I've reread Ender many times.
Yeah. I've probably read Speaker for the Dead more than once, but ultimately, I find the last two, once you get to the obsessive compulsive Chinese girl on Path, kind of tracing lines on the floor, I'm like, okay, I'm a little mired down here. But Ender's Game itself is great.
It's interesting. There's, from the different perspective, the series I know that does that. I like this. We're just talking about books now. This is good. Was the Pern series by Anne McCaffrey, because there's the Dragon Rider series, but then there's the Harper series. I think there's like two other ones,
multiple,
where
and
they tell the
prequels and
stories.
sequels,
Yeah, from a different perspective, even though it's the same time frame where they're telling the story. So it's an interesting kind of thought process if there's enough to the world that you can tell it from multiple sides.
To me, it really felt like Orson Scott Card knew he had something that could give infinite, publishing and financial opportunity. And I'm not saying there isn't value in the creation. It's just kept going back to that well.
Yeah.
And telling some version of that story or something. And lots of people have done this. Certainly he's not the only one, but I just found that Bean, the way it kind of makes Bean the heart of things, I had mixed feelings about it.
Sure. Well, the other one you mentioned was the Martian Chronicles, and I think neither of us has read those.
Yeah,
but
to my shame, I have never read them, and people tell me they're wonderful.
But big fan of Ray Bradbury, for sure.
Yep. Let me just give you the 5-minute story of Martian Chronicles, right? So I had a copy of this, like, books on tape, and Ray Bradbury reads it himself, and he did a little intro where he kind of told the story behind it. And the idea was he had these very short stories. Some had been published previously in magazines. Others had been written but not published. And he wanted to sell these stories to publishers. And crazy, this was apparently a world where you could go into a New York publisher and talk to people. But he took these stories to people, and he kept being told they wanted novels, not short stories. So he basically got the idea to take these stories that hadn't been written with any overt connection and connect them largely by writing these little brief vignettes between the stories. It's kind of like, and if you remember, if you know the Grapes of Wrath, there are chapters that tell the story of the Joad family. Then there are these little couple page interims where it just talks about aspects of the Depression and things going on. Bradbury does something similar. He creates these little pieces that become connective tissue between stories. And then he wrote some new stories to fill in some gaps. And it basically became kind of a history of the Earth's colonization of Mars. Hmm. Starting in 1999, which was a long way in the future in 1950, and 2026, ironically, right?
Oh, hey.
We're sitting here at the end of the Martian Chronicles. And so the stories are widely varied in tone, from very funny to very ironic to extremely sinister. And it just kind of tells the first few encounters of man with Martians, their first few attempts to make contact and how it goes wrong. And then ultimately how kind of Earth colonizes Mars and remakes it in its own image. And then how the outbreak of atomic war on Earth, these settlers on Mars come home. Like they feel this need to go back. Their loved ones are in danger. Things are falling apart and they go back. And in a lot of ways, even though it's about the quote unquote future, this is really about kind of life in 1950 and our atomic fears. Probably the most famous story in the collection is There Will Come Soft Rains, which has been much anthologized outside of Martian Chronicles. And it's the very famous story of an automated house on the last day of its existence, like 20 odd years after the atomic bomb has basically destroyed the community around it. It's like the last house standing in this neighborhood. And it's about the collapse of that house on its final day. And it's all about, again, our atomic fear and how we've destroyed ourselves. And so, it does what a lot of science fiction does. It talks about technology in the future as a way of looking at human nature and our, pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses and how we're our own worst enemy much of the time. And it's classic Bradbury. Like, he is a master of the short story. That is his warp and woof. And ultimately, each of these stories, many of them hold up perfectly well, beautifully on their own. You don't need anything else around it. You don't need the rest of the book to enjoy it. It's just having them laid out the way they're laid out in the book with those little connective tissue vignettes creates the feeling of an arc. Mm-hmm. This is first contact. This is how it goes wrong. This is how humanity seems to triumph on Mars, and then how we undo ourselves in the end.
Interesting.
Well, you've sold me. That's going on my list. I need to read it because I've loved Ray Bradbury, what I've read of him. But he's one of those authors that I've discovered some new things. You introduced me to The Halloween Tree.
It was fun.
This year. I had never read that before. And so I need to get into the Martian Chronicles.
Yeah. Years ago, I read one called The Illustrated Man. And I should have looked up if it came out before or after. It really is, but it doesn't have those connective sequences like that. There's a tattooed man, but each
that's the only connection
at the beginning and at the very end. But there's definitely similarities where, like the one where the kids are they have that projector screen where
Velt.
they can manifest like images on this screen, but then they become real. Like it's
the Velt is one of his creepiest stories, and the way they kind of get their parents into the Velt is,
with a lion. There's
very
a lion.
Sinister.
Yeah. And then the rain one. I remember I think it's a group of men or soldiers walking through rain on another planet, and they can't get out of the rain. So this rain is driving them mad, and they get lost. And but some of them did have hope, and some of them are funny. And as you say, master of short stories. The guy's amazing.
He's a great short story writer, and any of his collections, I'm sure, would sell you on that. This was one of the first ones I read, and it has a special place for me.
Yeah, the Halloween Tree, we just found this year around Halloween and went through it, and it was so fun. He basically does the continued stories of Halloween across time and cultures, but in the Ray Bradbury way, and he hooks it together, and it's a fun kids book. Really enjoyed that one too. All right. Tennyson and Idylls of the King was the other one that you mentioned has had specific impact on you. So yeah. Tell me what you love about Tennyson.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love things like Crossing the Bar and other poems of Tennyson's, but Idylls of the King is one of my favorite versions of the Arthur story. And it's weird, right? Because he wrote these over a long period of time. They were standalone idylls, right? Stories that he would write, and it took him quite a long time to complete it. But I really, you can look at the Martian Chronicles as just primarily a short story collection of disparate stories that are very loosely connected. I don't do that with Idylls of the King. I think there's more coherence. I think it's a stronger, coherent whole. And ultimately, there are a lot of ways to think about it. It's a tragedy. It tells the story of Arthur as a tragedy. And the adultery of Lancelot and Guinevere is, in many ways, the seeds of the downfall of Camelot. It's not aggrandized, it's not sugar-coated. They're not rooting for the lovers. It's the thing that undermines the vision of Arthur. And there is, I mean, you could argue there's debate about Tennyson as a man of faith or not, but there's a lot of clear language of following the king as the king follows Christ, and ultimately looking to Christ as our ultimate king. And what he means by that language has been debated, certainly, but I think it's a lot closer to a Christian vision of Arthur and Arthur's Camelot than some of the versions of the Arthur story. And I think there are a lot of ways to structure it, right? I think there's a clear archetypal progression: spring, summer, winter, fall. You begin with the coming of Arthur, where he shows up. He falls for Guinevere very quickly in the introduction. He delivers Britain as a kind of favor to Guinevere's father to kind of win her hand. There's this great line here: between the man and beast we die, and he comes in and saves them from the heathens and the beasts and establishes a kingdom to bring order and justice to the land, and is rewarded with Guinevere. But he sends his favorite knight and best friend Lancelot to get her and bring her back to Camelot. And the clear implication is that somewhere between Lancelot's arrival and their return to Camelot, she has fallen in love with Lancelot. Even as they marry, and he and Arthur kind of declares his love, I will love thee to the death. It's said that the queen replies with drooping eyes. Like, she already loves Lancelot. And so the seeds of the death and downfall of Camelot are there from the beginning. But the very first idyll proper, right, because you have the 10 stories of the Round Table that come after the coming of Arthur, before the passing of Arthur, is Gareth and Lynette, which is my favorite, because Gareth and Lynette is the picture of the ideal knight. This is Arthur's vision, the way it's meant to be. Gareth is the youngest of 3 brothers. His mother doesn't want him to go and join Arthur's court, zealous for him. In his protest to her, I'm going to read it to you. This is what he says to her. He says, "Man, am I grown? A man's work must I do. Follow the deer, follow the Christ, the King. Live pure, speak true, right wrong, follow the King. Else, wherefore born?" He's like, I am a man, and it's time to do man's work. And he wants to uphold the vision of his king. And so his mother makes him promise, I will let you go, but only if you promise me to spend 12 months and a day in the kitchen as a kitchen like scullion. You've got to be the lowest of the low servants of the kitchen. You can't be a knight. She thinks this will dissuade him. He says, done. And he goes to Camelot. He spends his year basically in servitude in the kitchen below his noble-born heritage. And the moment he's allowed to take up a quest and serve Arthur as a knight, he gets the quest to deliver this woman named Lynette's sister, who is in a castle surrounded by this river that has these 4 brothers who are holding it hostage. And Lynette, who doesn't know that this is actually a noble-born knight, thinks it's a kitchen knave, thinks Arthur is mocking her by assigning this kitchen knave to be her champion. And so the whole journey from Camelot to the battles with these knights, she reviles him, just talks nothing but trash to him for being a knave and a scullion and worthless. And he does not answer her in kind at all. He just says, lead on, and I follow. Like, he is courteous, he is polite, he is determined to see the quest through. He defeats the enemies, he earns Lynette's favor. It's just a wonderful example of kind of chivalry and courtesy and justice and doing what's right regardless of what's in front of you. And it's a beautiful story. But it all kind of starts to go downhill from there.
It really does.
Like you get to the middle of the book, and there are three key things that lead to the downfall of Camelot. There's Merlin succumbing to Vivian. It's basically a Samson and Delilah story where Vivian is no good and she wants power, and she knows Merlin has it. And he's a wisdom figure and a seer and kind of a counselor for Arthur. And after wearing Merlin down, much the same way Delilah wears down Samson, he gives her a secret to a powerful charm, and she immediately takes that charm and uses it on Merlin. And he's lost to the round table for good. And that's step one, right? Now the round table has lost Merlin. And then in the seventh idyll, you have Lancelot and Elaine, where Lancelot has a chance to love a worthy woman in Elaine, but ultimately he is devoted to Guinevere, even though that's an adulterous love. And Guinevere is super envious of Elaine and nasty about it. And there's a line in Lancelot and Elaine that's one of my favorite lines in the whole book. And I'm going to read it to you. This is the Tennyson analysis of Lancelot's choice, right? It's a choice to be faithful to Guinevere, who is another man's wife, rather than loving Elaine, which is an opportunity in front of him. It says, the shackles of an old love straightened him. His honor rooted in dishonor stood, and unfaithful kept him falsely true. Like his honor is rooted in dishonor. The target of his love is another man's wife. He should discourage, not nourish it, but he holds on to it. You wanted to jump in.
Oh, Elaine always gets me. I remember reading that story when I was very young and just being heartbroken for her start
Yes.
to finish. Just it's heart-wrenching.
It's the moment, to go back to Williams, it's the moment in the story where Lancelot can choose charity and love and what's right, or he can choose hell. And he chooses the illusion, the lie, the adulterous love, and bad things happen. Then the next story, the Holy Grail, the third key moment, the Grail quest in Tennyson is actually a distraction from the true mission of Camelot, because the Grail quest is only meant for Galahad. It's only meant for him. And Arthur warns them, this is not for you. This quest is not for thee, he says to the others. But they're so enamored of chasing after this Grail and the glory of the quest that they undertake it while leaving the mission of the Round Table to maintain order and to provide justice and to do the king's bidding, basically unmanned.
Mm-hmm. I love that you bring this part up, because I find this is often where you can tell people who have read the Arthurian legend deeply and those who haven't, because everybody has heard of the Grail and it's the idea that it's this great thing. But yet, specifically in Tennyson, it is a direct contributor to the breaking of the fellowship, the
100%.
breaking of the table. And that is just such a different way of thinking about it than I think is generally thought about.
Yeah, and there's a in that idyll, there's a sculpture that's briefly described. It's a sculpture that Merlin had done as Camelot was being built, and it's described this way. There are 4 zones or layers of the sculpture, and the text says this: and in the lowest, beasts are slaying men, and in the second, men are slaying beasts, and on the third are warriors, perfect men, and on the fourth are men with growing wings. And I remember Father McClatchy, as we talked about this passage, saying, this is the story of Camelot. There were beasts that Arthur conquers to establish the kingdom, right? So you go from beast slaying men to men slaying beasts. On the third are warriors, perfect men. The Round Table doing the work of the Round Table, honoring their king as the king followed Christ. The fourth level is the illusion and the lie. Men are not angels and are not meant to aspire to be angels. The men growing wings is the members of the Round Table undertaking the Grail quest that was not for them. And so they fall. And then the rest of the story really is kind of things falling apart. You have examples of knights who are not courteous. Tristram is the kind of foil to Gareth. He's none of the good things that Gareth is at the beginning. And so in the last tournament, you see this. And at the end of the last tournament, Arthur comes home to find the queen's bower dark because Guinevere has fled. And his fool, who you meet at the start of that idol lying on the ground sobbing, I am thou fool, and I shall never make thee smile again, because he knows that it's broken, that the round
Mhm.
table is broken. But even in the midst of its fall, you have what in many ways is the most powerful part of the book, the story, the idol Guinevere, which is 11 of 12. It's Guinevere's flight to an abbey where she takes shelter. There's a lengthy interchange with a novice that kind of cuts her conscience to the quick. But the key is Arthur comes to see her one last time. He's embroiled in civil war with Lancelot because of all that's going on and others. And he basically says to her, my last hope is that in glory, you will see me and come to me and know me as your husband, that you were meant to love me and not Lancelot or another. And she has no words. She's lying on the ground weeping. And after he leaves, she acknowledges that she had missed her chance, right? That ultimately when we meet the highest, we should love it. And I'll read what she says. She says of Arthur, "Thou art the highest and most human too, not Lancelot nor another. Is there none will tell the king I love him, though too late? Now ere he goes to the great battle? None. Myself must tell him in that purer life. We needs must love the highest when we see it, not Lancelot nor another." And so he forgives her. She is forgiven and ends an abbess and is redeemed in her own way, but the table is broken. And the passing of Arthur is a poignant finale, where at the end of this great battle, where so many of the knights he served with and who served under him lie dead, he has this moment of existential crisis where he looks around and says to Bedivere, "I seem but king of the dead." And Bedivere says, "No, my king always. And if the dead have kings, you're my king." And it's this beautiful moment of affirmation of loyalty, and that we should have stuck to our vision. But his time is over, and Camelot has failed, and it's the end. But I think most moderns aren't patient with it because it's dense Victorian poetry and lots of it. But in the midst of this long story are just some of the most beautiful images and lines you ever want to ever can find. Really, it's beautiful stuff.
100% agree. I am on record of, well, loving the Arthur legend full stop, but the Tennyson version is my favorite form of it that I've ever come across. And I've read most of them. It is just stunning. It is beautiful. And I do think it brings back the Christian element, because in so many forms of it, you can't read that in there, but in Tennyson it is. And
Yeah.
Tennyson does paint Arthur as the archetypal king. He is good by definition. I mean, that's the
Yes.
conceit, is that he is the perfect king. And I love that. And that arc from the beginning, where it's the oaths that men and Guinevere take to Arthur. He binds them to him.
Yes.
When Gareth comes to the
Yeah.
court, he is warned about the oath that you will be bound to the king,
Can I
oaths that men cannot keep.
can I read
Only
that quote to you?
Please, I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Merlin greets him. Is not named as a seer outside the walls, but he warns him, "For the king will bind thee by such vows as is a shame a man should not be bound by, yet the which no man can keep,"
Mm-hmm.
which is so beautiful.
And this is what I don't tend to do sad stories. If a story is just sad, I really have no interest in it. And so the fact that this tragic arc is something that has captured my heart so deeply is because it's not just sad.
No,
It's
that's right.
because there's that underlying hope of the perfect king. And so in this world, we don't keep those oaths. We are
That's right.
fallen, we are broken. But the king still reigns, the king still rules. And if we could keep those oaths, what a perfect world it would be. And we as Christians get to look forward to that hope of the king coming again, of the king reigning again with those oaths perfectly kept, not because of anything we do, but because of the grace and love of God. And so I think that underlying motif through the Arthurian legend just speaks to the Christian story. And each one of the knight's journeys is something that we may individually or know somebody who's experiencing that
That's
journey.
right.
We've all known the great saints like Gareth, who are just wonderful and humble and awesome. We've also all known the Lancelots, who are
Yeah.
mighty in this world, who everyone likes and everyone kind of should like, but they have a fatal flaw or a fault that keeps them away. We all have experienced this. We've all experienced these quests for the Grail, right?
Mm.
This object of divinity that is worthy to pursue, but it has to be pursued in the right way at the right time by the right person. And sometimes that's just not us. We get
Hmm.
above ourselves. And so all these lessons come out of this, and it's just stunningly beautiful and so well written. And I will forever be grateful to Tennyson for writing it.
Yeah, well said, and completely agree. And I think the trick, right, when you talk about those vows that we can't keep, but it's a shame that we not be bound by them. The key for us is to recognize that God's standard and ideal is beyond me to keep. The the solution is not to lower the standard and make it
Mm-hmm.
keepable. The standard is to seek forgiveness where we need it and seek God's grace to do what he calls us to do each and every day, and to grow in sanctification and to become more and more the people he wants us to be. And trust that when we stand in glory, this will be the case, right? Um, we will be what we were meant to be.
Yeah. One last thing on the Idylls of the King, and I'm actually going to refer to a different author. Are you familiar with Malcolm Guite's new work, Galahad and the Grail?
I am not.
Malcolm Guite is a poet. He's an
Yeah,
Anglican priest.
I know who Malcolm Guite is. Yeah.
Yeah, he just released a series called Galahad and the Grail. It's the first of 4 books he's planning to write. Wonderful.
Hmm.
It is like discovering a new series of Idylls. He
Interesting.
writes it in ballad format, and it is the Galahad and the Grail story told better than I've ever heard it told. And so for me, who loves Tennyson so much,
Yeah.
it was like discovering more Idylls. It was a little bit to me like, well, like the last books of the Wheel of Time. Robert Jordan's gone. He was never going to write anymore,
That's
but
right.
somebody stepped in and gave me more of the story. Little different flavor, little different style, but still recognizable and wonderful. So it has been a delight to me over the last couple of weeks to get to go through that story. So highly recommend it.
Thanks for the recommendation.
A moment from the Idylls that stuck with me for a long time is at the very end. I think Arthur says it to Sir Bedivere, but the more things are wrought through prayer than this world will ever know. It's
Mm-hmm.
something like that. It's in my memory perfectly. That might not be the exact wording, but the more things are wrought through prayer. That is, King Arthur lays there dying. He asks for prayer. And
Mm-hmm.
I just, that has stuck in my heart for decades, and it is beautiful. They're all beautiful. So thank you for sharing on Tennyson. I tell people that Stephen has a superpower where he can just summarize stories. So, go read the thing yourself, but Stephen can give you a really good summary as well. I think LB, you have that as well. So well done.
Well, thank you. I did do a little prep to be sure I could speak with some coherence about these things.
That's because they're so big and
Yeah.
there's so much depth and richness to them. It's not the same thing to summarize it, but to give a flavor of it to people who haven't read it yet, or can't read it for whatever reason. I just think is such a cool thing, such a gift, and it's kind of what we try to do, just to share love of stories in that way. So thank you for being
Yeah.
a part of it.
And if I can make one point here, 2 of the 3 things I've talked about are pretty hard work, I think. Martian Chronicles is, like most Bradbury, pretty accessible. I think the Idylls and Williams, there's a barrier to the modern reader who's used to kind of fairly transparent, fairly simple language, and you're gonna have to work for it. But I don't know if the name Leland Ryken rings any bells, but Lee taught literature at Wheaton, and he was on the pod, and we talked about devotional poetry among other things. And as part of his argument for people to read poetry is that even if it's different than your normal use of language, that's a good reason to read it. It's an exposure to a different kind of thing, and slowing down to read it carefully is good for you. I think there are a lot of hard things in this world that reward the time you invest in them. And as a general rule, we're prone as a people to the easy, simpler way. And I would encourage readers who maybe are a little daunted at first by either of these things, stick with it I think it'll prove that it is worth your time.
May I ask one more question?
As many as you like.
You went to Wheaton, and when I hear Wheaton, I think of the Wade Center.
Yeah.
Now, I've never been to the Wade Center. Is it as amazing as my mind has made it?
Yeah, you know, I mean, when I got there, the Wade Center was like a kind of extended office space in an academic building that was hard to access because it's a collection, right? It was a collection of various writings and objects and things like that. And one of my favorite profs, Lyle Dorset, had come from the University of Denver to be the curator of the Wade collection. Now it's got its own building, which is lovely and a beautiful building and all that kind of stuff. But the Wade collection is a great resource. When I did my senior seminar in literature, Lee Ryken was my teacher, and the theme of the seminar was the Bible in literature and the Bible as literature, maybe reversed, the Bible as literature and then the Bible in literature. And we read C.S. Lewis's monograph on the literary influence of the Authorized Version, where he talked about the impact that King James had on the English language and on us. And so when I had to write my big thesis paper for that class, I decided to take his description of how the King James had influenced literature and apply it to the Chronicles of Narnia, which is his fiction. And I spent a lot of time in the Wade Center pulling these master's theses about Narnia off the shelf and looking through these different people and their opinions on Lewis. And in most places, you wouldn't have access to this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely, again, I'm not as familiar with the current like actual building, and there are things on display there that are more visual, and you can go in and maybe have someone talk you through the Inklings and some of their things. But I found the Wade Center to be a very nice part about being a Wheaton student. It became practically helpful for me as a lit major who loved those writers.
Excellent. And that professor you just mentioned, he was the one you interviewed for the ESV Bible?
Yes, he was the
was
literary stylist for the English Standard Version. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of your great podcast episodes. That was
He's
really
great.
interesting.
Yeah. The one that comes out, I don't know when this episode will air, but the second Sunday in May, which is tomorrow for us in real time, is about his book on Tyndale's New Testament. And then the two that come after this are us talking devotional poetry. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to those because that was a really good episode.
Yeah, he's a bright man, and I owe a lot to him. He taught me a lot.
Okay, I have a couple wrap-up questions, unless there's anything else you guys want to say.
It's probably time. We've kept listeners long enough.
Oh, man, we did like a 3-hour one the other day on Treasure Island. Sometimes it just gets going,
When we first started doing this, we kind of thought, we'll go a half hour.
Yeah.
And then now we never get out in under 2 hours anymore. It's kind of ridiculous. Yeah.
Fair enough.
But it is a lot of fun. So really appreciate you joining us today. But question for you before we end. When somebody listens to one of your episodes, the Further Up, Further In podcast, like, is there something that you really hope that they take from that experience?
I mean, I think going back to the overarching theme, I hope what the podcast is driving toward is to persuade them, if they're not already persuaded, that the pursuit of more depth in the Christian life is worth whatever time you're willing to give it, and probably more time than you are giving it. And that ultimately we should spend more time on that, on less time on other things. And the older I get, the more important, that is to me. I used to teach kids, and I would worry as they went off to college, were they prepared for what life would throw at them? Did they have the roots they needed to survive? I now work on the other side of things in hospitals. And, if working in a hospital has taught me anything, is that sooner or later the storm will blow. And if you don't have the roots, you're going to have trouble withstanding the storm. And so I want people to take seriously that while there are certain things that are out of your control with your spiritual growth, there are many ways that you can be engaged in putting down roots and making sure that you have nurtured the spiritual life, the Christian life that you are living. And a lot of times we're bad at doing that and not well prepared for difficulty when it comes.
So, LB, if somebody wanted to find your books, find your podcast, where should they go?
The simple answer for finding the books is probably just Amazon. If you search LB Graham, I think 3 of them are basically print on demand through Amazon, and I think the other 7 they still have in stock. I recommend if you're going to start with something, you start with my first series, the Binding the Blade. The first book is called Beyond the Summerland, and if you're not too mad at me when it's over, then you might keep going and get to that conclusion we talked about in All My Holy Mountain, which is, I think, the pinnacle of the series. The podcast is called the Further Up, Further in Podcasts, and it's not about C.S. Lewis and Narnia, so I apologize for the misdirection, but if you got Apple or Spotify or whatever source of podcasts, it should be there.
Sounds good. Sometimes people have a quote from one of the things that they mentioned today that they kind of want to end with.
Let me just go back to Guinevere. We needs must love the highest when we find it. It is a good lesson for life. Let's do the work of lifting our eyes above the near horizon to see that which, it's hard to look at because we don't measure up to those vows we've taken, and those vows are aspirational. But when we meet Christ or things that point us to Christ, those are the things that should direct our affections.
And with that, we'll turn the page, and we hope you join us for the next chapter.